Hi everybody, this is Professor Paul Hicks talking to you again. This is your last week of the semester, so congratulations on finishing the semester, and hopefully you got great grades and you're going to go off and have a wonderful summer. Alright, so today we're going to talk about a particular theory called evidentialism. In philosophy, what you have noticed over the past semester is that philosophers have given reasons to believe whatever it is that they actually believe. So for example, if you were to go back to Socrates talking about the immaterial soul, he doesn't just believe the immaterial soul for no reason, he believes in it because of an argument that he actually has. And this is, for the most part, this is true throughout all the philosophies, that philosophers have reasons for what we believe, and that you ought to believe based upon the evidence, based upon some sort of reason. Now, is this actually true? Is this theory something that is actually true? So in this country, and in Western liberal democracies, we tend to think that people can believe whatever they want. Okay, well that's true legally speaking, you can believe whatever you want. But is it true morally speaking? And it certainly doesn't seem to be true epistemically. So when is that actually true and when is that actually false? So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So the first person I want to talk about is a mathematician by the name of William Clifford. Clifford is quite famous for his paper called The Ethics of Belief, and that's what we want to talk about today. So let's go ahead and just kind of get into this. So Clifford starts out with an example. He tells a story about a ship owner, and this particular ship owner runs an immigrant ship. That is, he takes immigrants from the old world over to the new world, and he's been doing this for quite a long time. Now, one day the ship happens to come back, and the owner looks at it and says it doesn't seem to be in great shape and it's going to need some repairs. But then he realizes he doesn't have the money for the repairs, and that's not something that he wants to take care of. And so what he does is that he doesn't listen to any of the engineers. He doesn't talk to any of the engineers. He avoids their company of any of the engineers, because these are people that will tell him his ship is not safe. He avoids anybody that disagrees with him whatsoever, and only focuses on people that actually agree with him. He says, you know what? This ship has made it over the ocean and came back so many times. I really only need to make it come across one more, and I'm sure just one more trip, it can make at least one more trip. Maybe he actually says, you know, the ship owner says, yeah, I'm going to leave it up to Providence. You know, just think about Providence. That is God's will. I'm going to leave it up to Providence. And if God wants these people, these immigrants, to get to the New World safely, surely He will actually make that happen. And then if it didn't, then that was really God's will in the first place, and that He would be therefore be blameless for any wrongdoing. And so what the ship owner ultimately does is that he stays away from anybody that disagrees with him, only associates with people that agree with him, and he comes to a conclusion not based off of the evidence that is readily available if he only saw it, but rather because he wants a certain proposition to be true, and that is, he wants it to be true that his ship is safe, because if he can convince himself that his ship is safe, then he doesn't have to make the repairs. And so he works himself up into a frame of mind. So ultimately, he's kind of lying to himself. When you might say he's bullshitting himself, something like that. Alright, so did the ship owner do anything wrong? So he sends the ship out, right? He works himself into the belief that the ship is safe. He sends the ship out, and it, of course, sinks and everybody on it dies. Did the ship owner do something wrong? And what is it precisely that the ship owner did wrong? Was it because the people died? Well, this becomes a problem, because Clifford says, look, it's not because the people died that it was wrong, because he didn't know whether the people were going to die or not, whether the ship was going to sink or not. He worked himself up into a frame of mind to send that ship off, and once he made that decision to send the ship off, right, it was right or wrong forever. If imagine, for example, that he sent the ship off and the ship actually came back and everybody survived. Now, did he do anything wrong still? I think our basic intuition is that he did in fact do something wrong, and that the way that he formed his belief was wrong. That he formed his belief in such a way that was not in line with evidence and good reasoning, and this is itself an action. So if you think about what ethics is, think about any sort of moral claim that something is right or something is morally speaking wrong. Think about what that actually is trying to say. Is it about some sort of action? You are actually doing something to bring about wrongness, and that's where wrongness seems to be. So did the ship owner bring about wrongness? Did the ship owner believe a false statement simply because he wanted to, and not because the evidence actually said that he ought to? All right? So I think for most of us, the basic intuition is the ship owner did something wrong. Okay, well, what's going to be followed by that is that the way that we form our beliefs is, morally speaking, is noteworthy. That we ought to form our beliefs in accordance to evidence, and not simply because it makes us feel good or something like that. You know, a lot of beliefs that people believe in might be rather benign, but what happens when we apply this type of thinking where we don't need reasons for what we believe, that we could go against the evidence for what we believe? What type of world are we going to have? What kind of society are we going to have? And Clifford is really horrified by this type of idea. So, all right. So we want to see that it's not just the action which follows from the belief. You could imagine, say, the ship owner, for example, said, I am perfectly certain that my ship is sound, but still, I feel it my duty to have her examined before trusting the lives of so many people to her. Now, Clifford actually agrees with that statement. He actually says it's right and necessary. It's right because even if a man's belief is so fixed that he cannot think otherwise, he still has a choice in regard to the action suggested by it, and so cannot escape his duty of investigation. So it's necessary because those who are not yet capable of controlling their feelings and thoughts, they need to have some sort of plain rule dealing with certain overt acts. So the connection now between beliefs and the action is such that we cannot sever a belief from the action that follows it. If you condemn the action, you must condemn the belief which caused it. Belief and action, they're interconnected. They're interconnected in such a way that if you hold a certain belief so strongly, you can't help but to act in accordance to that particular belief. And so your beliefs influence all of your actions. Now, clearly, the way you act, the way you treat other people is, morally speaking, relevant. But if all of your beliefs guide those actions, and you can willingly choose to have your beliefs in accordance to evidence, or willingly choose to just believe whatever you want based off of, some people call it faith, right? And by faith here, what I mean is belief without evidence, or belief that goes against the evidence, something like that. All right. If you do not, according to Clifford, if you do not justify your beliefs, and that you hold beliefs that are not based off evidence, you're doing something, morally speaking, wrong. And it is such a wrong that he actually says that it is a sin against all mankind. Right? He says, you know, to make the point, once we believe something, we immediately are committed to the act in accordance to our belief. Even if we do not overtly act immediately, what happens is the belief is stored in us to guide us for the future, and it becomes part of our entire belief system. What's going to happen to a society where people just believe whatever they want, they have no reasons for what they believe, they have no evidence for it, they're going to become credulous. And we can't trust a society like that. People are just going to believe all sorts of weird things. You can think about it right now during the pandemic. There's all kinds of conspiracies going around. There's conspiracies that Bill Gates is going to try to put in a microchip into everybody through vaccinations, right? What evidence do we have of something like that? Why should we believe that without some sort of evidence? Some people will actually argue, they'll say, well, look, my beliefs only affect me. They don't affect others. Right? So if, for example, let's say I believe that I have fairies living at the bottom of my garden. Now, you can allow me to have my delusional belief, and it doesn't really affect you. And so why can't I just say, my belief about fairies living at the bottom of my garden, that's my own personal belief, and it doesn't affect you, so you can't tell me that it's somehow moral or not moral. Here's the problem. Beliefs, according to Clifford, are like a common property. That is, they are passed down from one generation to the next. And he actually calls it an heirloom. So if you think about just your set of beliefs, where did you get your beliefs from? So, for example, your belief in politics, your belief in God, or whatever your religious or spiritual beliefs are. Where did they come from? Well, the number one answer that students often give me is that they came from their parents. And of course, their parents got it from their parents, and their parents got it from their parents. And so what happens with every generation is we pass down a certain set of beliefs to the next generation. It's not going to be a coincidence that my son and my daughter are going to believe things which are very similar to me, because I'm raising them in a very particular way to believe that way. And so it's really important that if we're going to transfer these beliefs as an heirloom from one generation to the next, that we try to make sure that only true beliefs are in there and not false beliefs. All right? Now, some people will say, but wait a second, I'm not, say, a leader of men, I'm not a philosopher, I don't have time to be a philosopher, I don't have time to go to school for 20 years and really think all these ideas out. Why should I have to do it? Well, here's Clifford's response. It's a universal duty. That is, if we establish something that is right for me, and we also establish that it's right for you, if something's wrong for me to do, it's also wrong for you to do. And so if it's wrong for, say, statesmen, the philosopher, leader of men, if it's wrong for them, it's also wrong for you. All right? He says, even the drunk guy at the end of the bar with his slow and frequent sentences will help kill or keep alive fatal superstitions which can harm society and the species at large. He says, even the hard-working housewife will pass on her beliefs to her children which will help knit society or destroy it. According to Clifford, no simplicity of mind, no obscurity of station can escape this universal duty of questioning all that we actually believe. Now, some people are going to say, look, this is really too difficult. You can't force me to really question all my beliefs like you philosophers want us to. You're just asking too much. Well, Clifford says this. He says, if you are refusing to investigate your beliefs, if you're refusing to have evidence for what you actually believe, then you shouldn't believe. You should withhold believing until you have evidence to believe it, until you educate yourself on doing this. All right. So that's kind of Clifford, really sort of in a nutshell. Now, I want to go ahead and give a different perspective. Instead of William Clifford, let's think about another philosopher by the name of William James. Now, William James had a speech called The Will to Believe that you have on the Learning Management System, Canvas. And it is a response to philosophers and thinkers like William Clifford. Philosophers have told people that unless you have evidence for your belief, you're doing something wrong, that one ought to really have evidence for everything they believe. Now, James says that, wait a second here, you can't always control your beliefs. The way that we think about beliefs needs to be thought about in a way about how much control do we actually have of our beliefs, and what type of beliefs are they, how are they formed, can we actually get enough evidence to believe whatever we actually need to believe. And so that's what the speech, The Will to Believe, is really about. So he says, let's take a look at any given hypothesis. Say God exists, for example. Well, there's a couple ways that we can look at any given hypothesis. One, we can say that it's either a live belief, that is a live hypothesis, or a dead hypothesis. So what do we mean by that? According to James, a hypothesis is live when the believer is able to believe it. And it's maximally live when somebody acts on that belief without questioning it. It is dead if it's an impossibility for the believer to actually believe it. So, for example, you know, many of you are raised to hold a particular religion. Typically, in this country, you have a Judeo-Christian religion. You are taught to believe a particular type of God. Now, for those of you who are raised to be Christian, what if I told you to be a Buddhist? Would you be able to do it? I mean, it's possible, I guess, to leave Christianity behind and become a Buddhist. But for most people, your attempt at religion, your way of understanding religion, has already been decided for you. And so belief in God from a Christian standpoint can be a live belief for you. But spiritualist beliefs based upon Buddhism would be dead to you. They're not possible for you to believe it. You can hold off much sillier beliefs, say a belief in Santa Claus or the belief in the Tooth Fairy. No matter what I do as a philosopher, I can give you all sorts of arguments maybe for why you should believe in Santa Claus. But ultimately, you're not really going to believe in Santa Claus because you know Santa Claus doesn't exist. Okay, so looking at the hypothesis, it could be live or it could be dead. Another way of looking at it is whether it's forced or avoidable. Are we forced to actually accept a position on the hypothesis, or is it something we can avoid? So the example that James gives, he says, either accept parts of my theory or don't. Well, what's the third possible option? All you really have here is that you can accept parts of your theory or you don't accept parts of the theory. Right? That is a forced option. Now compare that to avoidable. An example he gives is you go out with your umbrella or not. Well, there's another third possibility. You don't have to go out with your umbrella or not. Maybe you can stay home. All right. And the last one that we need to ask is this belief, is it momentous or is it trivial? So we define a momentous belief as something that's not going to come around very often. It's a really important kind of belief. We can't just get rid of it, right? So a momentous belief, so maybe a momentous opportunity. Imagine if I said, hey, I have an extra ticket to go on Elon Musk's new space shuttle to go to space. Do you want to go or not? That was momentous because that's not going to come around for you as an opportunity often. It's not trivial, right? Well, we have certain beliefs which are we might call core beliefs, that they are in fact momentous, that they affect a lot of the rest of our belief system. And so it's important that a decision is actually made. Compare that to trivial. Let's say you go to Subway for lunch and they ask you, what kind of cheese do you want on your sandwich? And you say American, but once you get to your table, you start thinking, I kind of wanted Swiss. That's not that big of a deal, right? You're going to survive. You'll move on with your life, and you're not going to think about that sandwich later, right? It's a trivial decision. All right. Now, here's the thing. Once you've analyzed the hypothesis for being either live or dead, forced or avoidable, or momentous or trivial, if it comes up to where it is forced, live, and momentous, that is, it's live in the sense that you have the ability to believe it, it's forced that you must make an actual decision on it, and it's momentous that it's really actually important you make a decision on it. When you have a belief which is live, forced, and momentous, then according to William James, you have what he calls a genuine option. You have a genuine option to decide your stance on a particular proposition, not based off of the evidence, because maybe evidence isn't there, but rather based upon a passional decision. Right? Your passions, maybe your emotions, your feeling of what it feels like. Is that proposition true or not? So now when we think about, according to James, when we think about our duties in the matter of opinion, there's really two ways that we're looking at it. That is, we're going to try to know truth, or we're going to try to avoid error at all costs. And what seems to be more important to you is going to dictate your position on whether we should try to know a lot but maybe have a few errors in our thinking, or should we just not believe anything unless we have absolute certainty for it, right? You kind of go back to like Descartes and that kind of Cartesian skepticism. Well, which one are you? Are you no truth, but allow some errors in your thinking, but you'll know more? Or say, I don't know anything at all unless I have absolute certainty for it. So ultimately what we're asking here is, how high is your bar, how low is your bar for knowledge, right? If you lower the bar for knowledge to allow some sort of truth in, but you're ultimately going to have some sort of error as well, then you have a pretty low bar for knowledge. The opposite, of course, of that is maybe your bar is too high, right? Your bar is, I'm not going to believe anything unless I have absolute evidence for it. Well, you're not going to believe a lot then, because what do you have absolute evidence for? There's not going to really be a whole lot of that. So there we have this kind of problem. So what is it that we are to do? Are we to shun error at all costs? Or are we to say, you know what, we're not perfect. I'm going to believe in certain propositions. I don't have complete evidence for it, but I sort of feel that it's right. According to James, Clifford has chosen the avoid error at all costs. That is, Clifford has decided that he's so afraid of ever being wrong that we should forego any sort of belief unless we can prove it with absolute certainty. Now, personally, I don't think Clifford really is making that position, but James is trying to say that that's the position Clifford is taking. All right, so we'll just kind of go with that for a little bit. All right, so these are not the same duties. We're not just talking about an identical commandment when we're talking about know truth or avoid error. Which one are you going to choose? That will cloud your intellectual life. And how did you choose it? These philosophers like William Clifford and David Hume and Bertrand Russell, who are arguing for some form of evidentialism, they are arguing that you should always have evidence for what it is that you actually believe, that you should never make your positions decided based off your passions or your emotions. But when you talk about know truth or avoid error, which is the very foundation of your belief system, the only thing you have are your passions to make that. Are you afraid of being wrong? Then you're probably going to avoid error at all costs. Do you want to know something which is true and have a lower bar for knowledge? Well, once again, that is a passion. It is a desire that you have. So, look, when do we actually have these types of questions, right? Where is it that we have these genuine options that are forced, momentous, and live? Well, James actually gives us certain examples of this. So, for example, the first one he gives us is moral questions. How can science possibly answer a moral question? How can science prove that, say, murder is wrong or torturing kittens is wrong? Right? How can we do that? You can't go into a scientist's lab and put a little rightness in a beaker and a little wrongness in a beaker and then determine whether a certain proposition is right or wrong. Science can't answer moral questions, according to James. What you need is to consult your heart, he said, when it comes to these types of moral questions. We can't wait for sensible proof as we can in science. Science, he says, can't prove value and worth. Questions like these of, say, having moral beliefs or not, is decided by our will. If your heart does not want to believe in a world of moral realism, your mind's never going to do it. And since moral skepticism can no more be refuted or proved by logic than intellectual skepticism can, he says when we stick to it, that there is truth, be it either way, we do so with the whole nature and resolve to stand or fall by the results. Another example of when we have a genuine option and we all seem to think that it's okay to believe not on reason but on passions is when it comes to personal relations. So the question he gives is, do you like me or not? So have you ever maybe been at a bar and there's a man or a woman that you are attracted to, and you want to know whether or not they're attracted to you. Well, what do? You have to approach them. You have to ask. You have to ask, do you like me or not? You have to, do something. Now, what if you were to say, well, I'm not going to do that because, there's a chance that she won't like me, and I'm going to be, I'm afraid of rejection, right? Things like that. You're not going to ever get the actual answer, because the only way to get the answer is to ask the person that you're attracted to whether they like you or not. But notice what you have to do. According to James, you're taking a little leap of faith. You're taking a leap of faith that that person might like you. And when you take that leap of faith, the truth of whether that person likes you or not actually comes out. And so for James, this is a situation where faith brings about truth, and there was no truth without the faith first. Right? All right. Another possibility where we have a genuine option is what he calls a social organism. So this could be a society, a government, an army, any sort of commercial system like a ship or an athletic team, any sort of grouping of people who are trying to have a certain goal attained. And they're all going to work together to attain a particular goal. So think of it this way. Imagine, say, I am a basketball player, and I'm calling a certain play, and I tell one of my teammates, I need you to run down court, and I'm going to throw the ball as far as I can to you. Now, isn't it possible that, right, we call that play, and that my teammate doesn't do what they were supposed to do? Yeah. But that teammate, I need to have some faith that they're going to do what they're supposed to do. Because if I don't have faith in my teammates being able to play the game correctly, we're never going to win the game. We're never going to reach the conclusion that we're trying to actually reach. So what we do with these types of personal relationships and social organisms is we take on faith that everybody will do whatever it is that they're actually supposed to do. Now look, some of you are thinking like these are just kind of silly examples. They're sort of childish. They have nothing to do with any sort of great matters at all. But here's another one, according to William James. James says, what about religion? What about God and a belief in God? If it's possible for me to believe in God, that is, it's a live belief, I'm sort of forced to either believe in God or not believe in God. And it is rather momentous. That is, my belief in God or my lack of belief in God is really going to determine a lot about me. Then I can't decide it on rational grounds. I must therefore decide it on my passional grounds. And here's what we get with James, is that people believe in God can be true for them. It may not be true for you or for somebody else, but it is true for them. All right, so if you go back to like the beginning of the semester and we were thinking about certain truth theories here, think about the theory of truth which says that a certain proposition is true if it solves a real-world problem, right? This is pragmatism, and William James is a pragmatist. If believing in God helps you get through the day, go ahead and do it because it's true for you. All right? So, William James, William Clifford. Clifford wants to argue, never believe in anything unless you have absolute evidence for it or you have sufficient evidence for it, depending on whether you're taking James's take or not. James is going to argue, say, well, that's true sometimes, but really there's going to be certain times, certain options, the genuine option, where the evidence is not all in, but we still have to make a decision, and so what am I supposed to do there? And of course James says faith is going to be acceptable. So I leave this to you. Is faith acceptable? And by once again faith, is it okay to believe something even though you have no evidence for it? Is that okay? Are you doing something morally speaking wrong? That's the question that I leave for you. I look forward to your responses. Have a good night, guys.